Hello everyone, and welcome to Kevin's Seventh Heaven. Today we are going to finish our journey through Walt Whitman's Song of Myself by learning about Walt Whitman, the background of the Song of Myself, and a bit of analysis and opinion of the poem itself. Walt Whitman Jr., yes Jr., I didn't know he was a junior either, was born May 31st, 1819, in West Hills, New York, and died on March 26, 1892. Along with being a poet, he was also an essayist and a journalist. He would often include both transcendentalism and realism into his writing, and is often thought of as the father of free verse. Our subject, Song of Myself, is thought to be one of the earliest examples of free verse and representing the core of Whitman's poetic vision. He self-published the first edition of Leaves of Grass, of which Song of Myself is a part, in 1855. In an attempt to reach the average citizen with an American epic poem. During the Civil War, he traveled to Washington, D.C., where he helped in the hospitals treating the wounded. He grew to have an intense admiration for Abraham Lincoln, which is why he authored both O Captain, My Captain and When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, following his assassination, as well as giving a series of lectures about Lincoln after his death. He suffered a stroke toward the end of his life, which caused the further dissolving of his health. His funeral was a very, very public event. Song of Myself is the first poem in the book Leaves of Grass. It was untitled and not divided into sections in that first edition. In the 1856 edition, it was titled Poem of Walt Whitman, an American, which was then shortened to just Walt Whitman by the 1860 edition. It was divided into the 52 sections in the 1867 edition, and did not receive the title Song of Myself until the last edition, in 1891-1892. It is in free verse, meaning it does not adhere to any rhythmic or rhyming structure, and is meant to be more similar to normal speech patterns. Without those structures, you are more focused on ideas than wordplay. The ideas we will discuss are transcendentalism, realism, self, and sexuality. Transcendentalism is the philosophy of seeing the divine in the everyday, rather than in a separate and distant heaven. People and nature are seen as inherently good, with society and institutions corrupting the individual. We definitely see that when Whitman pays very close attention to nature and sees small miracles in it. For example, this passage from section 14. The wild gander leads his flock through the cool night. "Ya-honk," he says, and sounds it down to me like an invitation. The pert may suppose it meaningless, but I, listening close, find its purpose, and place up there toward the wintry sky. The sharp-hoofed moose of the north, the cat of the house-sill, the chickadee, the prairie dog, the litter of the grunting sow as they tug at her teats, the brood of the turkey hen, and she with her half-spread wings. I see in them and myself the same old law. He identifies those who do not pay attention as the pert, who think themselves above nature. But he connects those who do the work of life day in and day out with that same transcendence, like in this example from section 15. The pure contralto sings in the organ loft. The carpenter dresses his plank. The tongue of his foreplane whistles its wild ascending lisp. The married and unmarried children ride home to their Thanksgiving dinner. The pilot seizes the kingpin. He heaves down with a strong arm. The mate stands braced in the whaleboat. Lance and harpoon are ready. He goes on, naming all of these salt-of-the-earth working people, finally ending the section with this line. And of these, one and all, I weave the song of myself. There is an equality he feels with all individuals. But he is also prone to using realism. Realism is the attempt to represent the subject matter truthfully, without artificiality or exaggeration, and avoiding speculation or supernatural ideas. In this case, he is looking at the pre-Civil War world he lives in, and talks about the vagaries of it. He is brutally honest about most common problems of the day, in this example from section 33. The disdain and calmness of martyrs. The mother of old, condemned for a witch, burnt with dry wood, her children gazing on. The hounded slave that flags in the race, leans by the fence, blowing, covered with sweat. The twinges that sting like needles his legs and neck, the murderous buckshot and the bullets. All these I feel or am. His realism is working with his transcendentalism to condemn the puritanical and slave institutions of the day. He sees them as much a part of himself and America as the small miracles he described before, because those same institutions are human, just like he is human. With a poem titled Song of Myself, it is no surprise that the main focus is the idea of individual self, as well as a communal self. To try to find a distinct example of where self fits in would be to try and reread the whole poem again in its entirety. He attaches his sense of self to the divine, to other individuals, to nature, to animals. It seems he feels both infinite and limited at the same time. It reminds me of the song My Soul by Minnesota musician Peter Mayer. Here is an excerpt of the words to that song. But my soul is so much bigger than the very tiny me. It reaches out into the snowstorm like a net into the sea. Out to all the lovely places where my body cannot go. I touch that beauty and embrace it in the bosom of my soul. You can find more about Peter at petermayer.net, and the link will be in the description. Walt and Peter both seem to have this sense of connection that you can feel between yourself and all aspects of the world by simply noticing and caring. Finally, we have sexuality. Sexuality is not necessarily a theme of the poem, but is certainly an aspect of it. Social conservatives of the time denounced the poem for flouting the societal and moral norms of the day because of its blatant depiction of sexuality. In 1882, the district attorney in Boston threatened action against Leaves of Grass for violating the state's obscenity laws and demanded that changes be made to several sections of Song of Myself. Although no changes are recorded to Song of Myself, Whitman did make changes to other poems in Leaves of Grass, such as Children of Adam and To a Common Prostitute. However, he did not shy away from the sexual parts of the human experience, because they are just that, a part of our nature. There are lots of parts that we would see as just alluding to sexuality, but would have seemed stark and in bold letters in his time. It is in these parts that we can tell that Whitman was at least queer in his sexuality. His descriptions of some males in the poem seem almost like romance novel character descriptions, such as this example from section 13. His blue shirt exposes his ample neck and breasts, and loosens over his hip band. His glance is calm and commanding. He touches the slouch of his hat away from his forehead. The sun falls on his crispy hair and mustache, falls on the black of his polished and perfect limbs. He was much more open about who he was and what his place he felt he had in nature and society than a lot of people in those days. Now for my opinion. I very much enjoyed reading through this poem, and felt like the poetry equivalent of reading War and Peace. I usually got more wrapped up in the reading than I should have, and it was more difficult for me to be academic about it. At over 1,300 lines, it is a very long poem, and it was hard to remember every part of it. I feel it would take several readings to really digest it. There is some connection I feel with his thoughts and ideas, especially the transcendentalism and realism, as they are so close to Unitarian Universalism. I think it is essential reading to understand the American mind of the day, as it shows both the good and the bad of America at the time. All in all, just thoroughly enjoyable. Next week, I am not sure what Monday and Wednesday will be about yet, but Friday will be the June edition of Holiday for Trivia, so keep a lookout for that. Please like, comment, subscribe, and make sure your notification bell is set to all. It will really help me get this channel going. Thanks for listening and learning about Song of Myself for the last several weeks. Anyway, ta-ta for now. Love you all.